to Model-View-ViewModel design patterns. We're going to create an app for South Mountain Motors that will contain 4 pages. There'll be a title page, an inventory page of the cars on the lot. We can click on an item in the collection view and see a detail page for that. We can also update and delete here. And from the title page, we can go to an add car page and we can add in make, model, year, the number of miles, the price, and a link to an image on the internet that we want to use. So we'll look at how to do shell navigation between those pages when we're not using a flyout menu or a tab bar. The data is going to be contained in a SQLite database, which is a very popular database for doing local mobile app data persistence. It allows us to do CRUD operations, so the create records, read records, update, and delete. And to accomplish that, make it a little bit easier, we're going to use 2 NuGet packages. The main one is sqlite-net-pcl, and there's a helper one of sqlite-pcl raw.bundle_green. When we're setting up a Model-View-ViewModel architecture, we're also going to add in a data service that could be done as a model. We're going to do a separate folder for our data service, and that data service is going to allow us to create the connection to a local directory, read and write the data to a file in that local directory that we'll create, so data persistence, and then handle those CRUD operations, the logic of those. We're also going to use a singleton design pattern so that that data service exists at only one time. It's only created once, and we're going to inject that into our different pages using dependency injection. And of course, we'll get a little more practice using collection views. So once again, we have our title page. We're going to read in a little bit of data from a text file. When we create our data file, it's going to initially give us these 7 cars. So we're going to start with some sample data to begin with. And again, we can click on a car. And here we could actually modify any of the items in the record. So maybe you want to change the price here from $26.99 to $25.999. And I can say update, go back to my list, and if I update the list, we'll now see the price has changed. I'm going to go back to the main page and click the plus sign to go to the add car page. And I'm going to add a Buick Encore. The year will be 2017. It's going to have 98,347 miles. And we'll say the price is $85.40. And then for the image URL, I'm going to go out to Wikipedia or Wikimedia Commons and search for a Buick Encore. Find the image I want to use, and I'm going to right-click or control-click on the Mac and choose Copy Image Address, and then go back to our project and paste the URL in. You'll see the car appear here. That's how you know the URL is valid. Now on the PC side, you may have a few challenges. You have to set up your Android emulator to be able to allow pasting from the developer machine, or you may need to open up Chrome on the emulator and copy it from there and paste it into the emulator. So I've got this new record in. I'm going to click Add Record, and I'm told that the 2000 Buick Encore was added. It clears my screen, and I can now add in another car. Let's go back to our inventory, and again I'm going to update the list, and there's my Buick Encore now as part of that inventory list, and I can view the details. So that's our project. So let's jump into Visual Studio, and we're going to create this project in 4 phases. I created a project in Visual Studio 2022 called SM Motors as a .NET MAUI cross-platform app. And we're going to set up a project for MVVM, Model-View-ViewModel design pattern. In our course site, there's a zip file for the assets, and you can download that, unzip it. And these are some resources we're going to use in our project So in the resources folder, we're going to add the Tahoma bold and the Tahoma fonts. For our images, there is an SM motors underscore title, the JPEG. We'll add that in, set the build action of that to MAUI image. The fonts, of course, build action MAUI fonts. And then in the raw, we're going to add SM motors underscore y.txt and set the build action there to MAUI asset. And if you're working on a Mac, we're also going to add the SM motors underscore y2.txt. It's the exact same file, but we're going to put that in our root directory and set the build action there to bundled resource. Then we're going to add in a models folder. You can right click on your solution and choose add new folder. And we're going to name our first folder models. Then we'll add in another folder, call it views, a third one for view models, and a fourth one for data services. Next, let's add in our NuGet packages. Go to Tools, NuGet Manager, Packet Manager, and we're going to add in the CommunityToolkit.Mvvm. So you want to add that into your project and choose Install. Then we will add in the sqlite-net-pcl. This is the one by SQLite-net. Version 1.8.116 is the current version. Again, we're going to add that in, so install that. And then along with that, we're going to need the SQLite-pcl raw.bundle_green by Eric Sink. And the version I'm using here is 2.1.7. We'll add that to our project. And then you can close the NuGet Solution Manager. We'll start coding with the car class. So right click on Models, choose Add, Class, this is going to be just a blank class that we'll call Car.cs. Let's take a look at the code for the Car.cs data class. And I'm using SQLite and system component model.data annotations. Those are the two directives. I have CommunityToolkit.Mvvm in here, .component model. I didn't use that in this case. I changed the class from internal to public. And then I have a little comment here that I disabled CodeLens. CodeLens is what provides those reference points for how many times various methods are used. And you can turn that off if you find that gets in the way. I find it's useful for me in debugging, but not when I'm writing code. And so the way to get to that is you can go to Tools, Options, Text Editor, open up all languages, and there's CodeLens, and I unchecked the Enable CodeLens. If I'm going to enable this back again, you can see the references it provides. And so it shows, for example, that year was referenced 5 times and models referenced 6 times. Sometimes it's useful, sometimes it just gets in the way. So I'm going to go back to Tools, Options, Text Editor, all languages, CodeLens, and disable that. So I have a bunch of getters and setters here for properties. And one of the cool things about using the SQLite NuGet package is it does some code development for us. We can specify what the primary key is. In this case, it's going to be my integer of ID. And also I'm going to specify that that should be auto-incremented. The NuGet package will take care of that for me. It generates the source code to enable that. And that's all I need to do to make that ID a primary key and have it auto-incremented. I can also have fields that are required. And there's a bunch of other annotations. If you look through the SQLite documentation, you'll see those things. But I have a string called make, one called model. I have integer properties for year and miles. Year is going to be required. And then also a double value of price, which is required. A string for the image URL, that's going to be the the URL of a photo out on the internet that I want to utilize. And then also create a string for YMM, and that stands for year, make, model. I wanted to have those three properties concatenated together for purposes of display. And sometimes it's just easier to do that as an extra property of your class. I have a blank constructor, but I also have a constructor where I'm passing it the data of make, model, year, miles, price, and the string URL, and setting those fields accordingly, and also generating the YMM with a method I'm going to show you here in a sec. And this is useful for when you're creating a new car, and you can generate that car instance and then just pass it to our car service that we'll also look at shortly. I created a method called validate. It is returned two values. One's a Boolean and one's a string. So this is what we call a tuple. And I'm going to go through the different properties being passed for a car, in the case of like a new car, and make sure that the data is valid. And if it's not, I'm going to return false. And so if that bool is false, I can handle that with an error message. And if it's false, the error message that's generated is the second item. So I'm returning a validity tuple is the name I gave this tuple variable. And then here's my get YMM. All I'm doing is concatenating to year, a space, a make, a space, and the model. So that's my data class for car. For the data service, I gave you a CarService.cs file in the assets folder that you can simply import, add to it here. Let's just open up that file. So here's my car service. Again, some using directives. It's a partial class car service. And then I'm setting up a string for the file name. And I'm going to make that file name cars.db3 actually. I was trying to see how things worked in terms of generating some new cars. So that's why I added cars2. I wanted to wipe out the old database. Let's make it cars.db3. And then a path. And the path we're going to use here is simply the application data directory that is part of the device, part of the device operating system. It's going to be different for iOS versus Android versus Windows and Mac OS. This takes care of the various devices. Then we're going to create a SQLite async connection. We call it dbcon. And then another one called database, which will reference dbcon. If dbcon doesn't exist, that's the two question marks and the equals there, it's going to create a new SQLite async connection with that DB path with some flags of create, rewrite, and shared cache. There are various flags you can use with the SQLite. Again, you'll see that in the documentation on SQLite. If you're not using dependency injection, you probably want to create a list for your inventory. I've got that commented out. Instead, I'm going to create just a car instance named car, one named new car, an observable collection that's going to be tied in to that CommunityToolkit.Mvvm called cars, and then another car called current car. That's going to be our selection out of the observable collection. Which car did they select? My concatenator here is to create the path and create that DB connection. And then we're going to call an asynchronous method called createTable. If it doesn't exist, it's going to create a new table from car using our Car.cs properties. And again, the SQLite will take care of building that table for us. I have a method called createTable if not exists. So if it doesn't exist, it's going to create a table. It's also going to populate some cars in that table. We'll see in a minute. If it does exist, it just ignores it. So this is a way to ensure that the table exists the first time you load and run this application. Then I have a method here called populate cars. I put in some new cars with the make, model, year, miles, price, and the image URL that I want to use. And then I simply used the add car async method down below to generate that car into our observable collection. And I added 7 cars here of various types, various makes and models. I also created a method called getInventoryMMY, make, model, year, in which I'm going to query our observable collection of cars. So the database table car, I'm going to turn that into a list asynchronously, put that into a list called my cars, and then go through my cars, and I'm going to order that list by the make, the model, and the year toString for all those cars. So it's going to give me an alphabetical order by make, and then by model, and then by year. From that query, I'm going to create a new observable collection called cars. And then I'm going to go through that query and simply add each car to my cars observable collection. We have an execute here that's using some tables and a table result, if that table exists or not. And this is used in some other methods. It's kind of a helper method. Here's the get car by ID async. I actually ended up not using this, but I wanted a way that I could pull a car from the observable collection by its ID. That sometimes becomes important. In the case of this app, we're simply going to pull the car from the collection, and we just make it a new car element, or new car instance. I didn't need to get it by its ID, but that's there for future reference. I have a method to add a new car asynchronously, and here's where we're going to use that execute as a helper to do that. We're going to update the car asynchronously, calling a method called update async, and same with the deleting the car async. So we're going to affect our database by calling the method delete async, and that's built into the SQLite NuGet. There's a bunch of methods here that I ended up not using, kind of more for future reference. You don't have to create these. I just left these in here for now. I had created them, didn't use them, and I just commented them out. Then in the views folder, we're going to add 4 XAML content pages named title page, inventory page, details dialog, and add page. Probably should have named the details dialog as details page. I was initially thinking making this a dialog pop-up. Had some technical problems making that work since the view models are not content pages. I suggest, though, following along, leaving it named details dialog, but if you'd like to change that name, you're welcome to do so. Just make sure you change it wherever it's referenced in code. Then for the view models, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to add in classes. These will just be empty classes. The first one will be title page VM. You could choose to spell out view model if you wanted. Just make sure again you change the references within the code. We're going to be creating 4 different pages, so title page VM.cs, inventory page VM.cs, details dialog VM.cs, and add page VM.cs. These are going to be our code, in essence, our code behind for the views. We're not going to use the code behind anymore that's included in these, other than to bind our view to the view model. Next, we're going to go into the MauiProgram.cs. And I'm going to add some using statements here for accessing the data services and the views. I'm going to shorten that to Tahoma space bold.ttf by specifying it as just simply Tahoma bold. And then we're going to add some singleton services. Now, a singleton design pattern means we open only one instance of that class. So we're going to create one instance of our car service, one of our inventory page, our title page, and our add page. But do not do that for the details dialog. That causes some problems in terms of correctly updating those fields. We want to be able to build a new version of that each time. Next, let's go into the AppShell.Xaml. And we're going to set up our shell content to use the title page. Now, one thing we have to do is, because that title page is in a views folder, we need to specify a new namespace, XML namespace. Views is going to equal clr-namespace.smmotors.views. If you just create the quotes and then begin to type in SM Motors, you'll find SM Motors views. And then our routing here will name title page and change the title to title. In the app page XAML CS, again, we're going to have some directives for the data services and the views. And here's where we're going to create the car service that we will use for dependency injection into our various pages. So I have a public static car service, lowercase c. I'm going to initialize the components for the app shell, and then we'll create our new car service. We're going to register some routes for those 3 pages of cars inventory, adding a car, and our details page. So I need cars inventory, add vehicle, and details, and we're specifying the type of those 3 different pages in terms of the classes. And that concludes our initial setup of our project. In the next video, we will code the title page and the inventory page. If you just jumped into this video, you can see all the videos from the .NET MAUI Practicum playlist by clicking on the image in the lower right. And if you'd like to be alerted to future videos I create, you can click my picture in the top right to subscribe to the channel.